Sam, alcoholic and an addict.
And this is Tenacious Recovery. You got to be tenacious about your recovery if you want to be sober and maintain your sobriety. I'm sitting here in the think tank in Washington Township, New Jersey. And we are coming in and we're going to do some topics today. We don't have a guest, but we're going to do some topics. And my partner wants to take over. Go ahead, brother.
I feel as though up until this point we've had about 10 guests, including ourselves, 8 guests. So
yeah, 10 total with you and I. Yeah.
And we've heard a lot of different stories of recovery, very diverse stories, different people, different paths, different lives today. But we really haven't given you all a chance to get to know us better in our lives as we live them today. I feel like we both told our stories and how we got sober, but I feel like we've alluded to working in the industry of recovery, which we both do, and then that's actually how we came to know each other. I was blessed to come in contact with Vince here about 5.5, maybe 6 years ago. I was working for a local treatment provider, and he proved to be an incredible mentor for me, understanding kind of the treatment space from a different side. And he, this man has helped thousands and thousands of people. I'll say he's very, very humble. He doesn't really allude to that a lot, but he is the first call for thousands and thousands of union men and women out there that need help. And he is so thorough. How long have you been doing this?
It's about 31 years.
31 years. He is one of the most thorough human beings I've ever worked with. He's super detail oriented. And he makes sure that the members that he represents get the absolute best care possible to a T. I mean, I remember a time when you and I were working on cases while you were on a cruise ship in Italy. Do you remember that?
It was a couple of years ago. My wife and I took a 30th wedding anniversary cruise through the Mediterranean, and I was doing it, of course, like in the middle of the night for me, but it was, 3 o'clock in the afternoon here. You were in California. It was like, 3 in the afternoon or whatever. But, I got all the work done overnight and then slept in, and everybody still made it into treatment and had a good episode.
Well, what was funny for me was you told me, he says, "Hey, listen, brother, I'm going away. I'm going on a cruise to Italy." And I'm like, "Great, awesome. You deserve it." I said, "Whatever you need, I'll handle everything, in terms of the back end, just so you can kind of enjoy yourself. I would hope not to hear from you, while you're enjoying a vacation."
Sure.
48 hours later, it's like 1 a.m. in the morning, and I'm getting emails from this guy, and he's like, "Hey, it's go time."
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So to me, I've always tried to kind of work that way, to never miss a beat. I mean, my wife will tell you that I literally work 25 hours a day, 8 days a week.
Yeah, you have to have an understanding family. However, you still have to make time for your family. You have to have some separation. There are some boundaries, but as you get better and better at what you do, it takes less and less time to actually accomplish whatever tasks you're trying to accomplish, therefore leaving more time with family. You don't have to always get up in the middle of dinner to do this or do that, because you have it down to a science, kind of.
You kind of have to understand how to prioritize your time.
Absolutely.
I struggled with that for a really long time. I'll never forget, I missed my daughter, my oldest daughter, Sophia, who's 9 now. It was her 5th birthday. We were renting this house. It was the 4 of us. We were renting this tiny, maybe 900 square foot house in the suburbs of Philadelphia. And it was her 5th birthday. And I kid you not, I'm like ordering dinner. She wants pizza or whatever. And the power goes out.
No.
The power goes out, and it's June. Her birthday's in June. It is hot. It's hot as ever. It is hot as hell, right? And all of a sudden, my phone starts exploding. I'm getting calls. I think I was trying to help like 4 or 5 different people at the same time get into treatment, right? But the problem is that I had bad service and I didn't have Wi-Fi. On top of that, my cell phone was about to die. And I had no way to charge it given that the power was out.
Sure.
So I got out in my car and I just started driving around and working while driving, which I would not recommend. And time just kept going on. I wasn't making any headway with any of these cases. All these potential people that were seeking treatment, it just wasn't where it needed to be for them to accept care. And I was kind of doing the dance with loved ones. I was doing the dances with the people who had reached out to me to help them. And no one was going into treatment. And my wife is like, where are you? Okay.
Of course.
I show back up like maybe 2.5 hours later. Nobody sought care. And I missed my entire daughter's birthday party. And I remember going to sleep that night thinking to myself, I'm not going to sacrifice watching my children grow up to do this perfectly. You know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, I can only do so much.
I always say you can't want it more than the person you're trying to help. And in those 2.5 hours you were driving around, you probably wanted it more than they did. And maybe they sought treatment again the next day or 2 days later or whatever, but you certainly didn't have enough in you to convince them to go to treatment right then and there. And again, you can't want it more than they want it.
It can be super frustrating at times. Also because it is our career, but on top of that, I mean, it's the job we signed up for.
Right, you're still trying to save a life too.
I could work in a restaurant, or I could be, you know what I mean? I could be a union machinist. And at the end of the day, if I get that call, no matter what, just based on the way that I got sober, like it would kind of always be the same outcome.
Yeah, you're still going to jump in and help because let's face it, there's 12 steps, 12 traditions. The 5th tradition, continue to help the alcoholic or addict that suffers.
I'll say that working with you over the course of, we'll call it the last 6 years, has been very interesting for me because I learned a lot about a certain vessel of recovery that is reaching out to your union / employer for help.
Mm-hmm.
And in my experience, I mean, not to qualify myself, but I've probably done this about 1,000 times. Okay, maybe give or take, maybe 2,000. And I'll find that it goes much more differently than when a conventional sick and suffering addict or alcoholic would seek treatment, because you come in with your job, your primary source of income, well aware of what's going on. So it creates, those first, I always say the first 14 days of treatment are the hardest because the addict and alcoholic comes in and they want to distinguish themselves from everyone else in the building.
Sure.
They want to leave, they want to point out everything that's wrong, and they don't want to engage because they're full of fear more often than not. They're afraid that life brought them to this point, and they're kind of afraid of taking that next step of surrendering, right? So that first 14 days is always so brutal. But I'll say that when you come into treatment by way of someone like Vinny here, and within 48 hours, you're taken out on short-term disability, so your bills are essentially paid.
It's usually within 24 hours.
Right.
It's usually the day you get the treatment, all your FMLA and your short-term disability paperwork is already taken care of.
It's already done, right? And then knowing that, I don't want to say the word big brother, right? But knowing that your paycheck is essentially watching you, it provides a different type, and from my experience, I've noticed that it provides a very different type of motivation for members, for these sick and suffering, to complete treatment. But the beautiful thing is the outcomes, because in those first 14 days, they're going to struggle just like anyone else. They're going to try to differentiate themselves. They're going to try to figure out a way to get out of this. But the second 14 days,
they're working.
The second half of treatment, they're in it, right?
Yeah,
they're
doing
engaged,
the work.
and by the end, they don't want to leave. But
the good thing is I'm not the employer. If they get sent in from the employer, that's a different thing. Everybody that comes to me is, I'd say 95% of them are voluntary. So they really want to be there. If they're giving you a hard time 10 days into treatment, that's when I get on the phone with them and try to redirect them. But the employer is not over their shoulder watching treatment. You know what I mean? But if they come to me, then they come a different way. If they contact a company EAP, it's a different story.
It is
and
totally different.
They're going to refer you to the treatment center that's literally down the street, and they may not have the services or the products on hand to help you get better. Take the combat veteran. My union, the machinists union, the fighting machinists, we have about 40,000 veterans in our ranks, and a lot of them have done multiple tours of duty in war in the Middle East. So they have PTSD and they have a lot of other issues that, say, someone else doesn't have. If you put them down the street in a treatment center, they may not have that program that can help out the combat veteran or the woman that was sexually assaulted or something like that. So relying on a company EAP is not the thing that I would do. And I didn't do it when I got clean, and I got clean back in 1986. I went through the union EAP back in the day and never relapsed. Here I am. You go through the company EAP and they're going to take the path of least resistance. I know for a fact they would have referred me to an intensive outpatient program, not a residential treatment center, which may have ended in tragedy.
We don't know what would have happened.
No idea.
I will agree with you, though. When you go through a company EAP, a company employee assistance professional, it does lack the attention to detail that someone such as yourself can provide. And on top of that, it creates a real set of handcuffs for the member. A real set of handcuffs.
And on top of that, when you get back to work, because the company EAP knows about it, you have to sign, since you went to the company EAP, you may have to sign certain release forms, possibly giving your company that you work for the knowledge that you're going into treatment for such and such a problem. So now when you get back, they may have you on an 18-month urine screening program, which if you utilize the union EAP like myself, we just get you back to work the normal way. We get clearance by the doctor, you get back to work, released to full duty without restrictions, and you're back to work. If you utilize a company EAP, they may make you jump through hoops, and we all know this isn't like a normal kind of illness. Making it the first 18 months without a slip up, it's kind of it's doable. The people that I help and pinpoint programs for them, they're very much less likely to relapse because of the care we're taking in picking out a program. And that's what people don't do. They just utilize a treatment center down the street.
More often than not paired with like a hospital health system.
Or outpatient, which is even worse. Like, oh, ever been in treatment? No. Oh, well, you have to go to outpatient first, according to your company EAP. That's just not the case.
Well, I think I've also seen in several cases with some of these large commercial EAPs that companies sign up for, and really you're talking to a clinician, probably in a call center, sitting in front of a computer somewhere.
Sure.
And if I get on the phone with you and I say, "Hey, I'm really struggling smoking crack cocaine." Okay, how often are you smoking crack cocaine? Oh, I don't know, once or twice a week. Now, let me tell you something. I've smoked crack cocaine before. There's no shot you're doing it once or twice a week.
You're doing it once or twice every other hour.
It is physically impossible. But the problem is that due to ASAM criteria,
right,
that person on the other end of the phone is going to say, "Oh, let's go next to crack cocaine once or twice a week." You need to see a therapist. You don't even need intensive outpatient. Right. You need IOP.
And in their defense, they have to take your word for it.
Absolutely.
Unless they drill down on the problem, because there's still a lot of shame in this. So you don't always get the truth. So you got to spend a little time on the phone and kind of drill down on that. I smoke crack, once a week or twice a week. Come on, man. Give me the truth. Tell me the truth. Whereas a company EAP may not want to drill down. They may take your first answer and, well, ASAM criteria, you just don't meet the criteria for residential treatment. And some say, well, there's no withdrawal period. So you certainly don't meet criteria to be in residential treatment.
whatsoever. And I find that a lot of people kind of get, and then they get referred to a therapist that they find the same way, something down the street that they find on like SAMHSA, which is a massive helpline for anyone seeking treatment with any type of resources. And they just find something and they get stuck in what I would say is like a cycle that isn't productive, right? It isn't productive, but they feel like they're doing the right thing. And more often than not, I mean, how often do we see a member, they kind of call in and then they get cold feet, right?
Of course.
They realize that they've done something and fear kind of starts to creep in and they start to sort of figure out ways that they can get out of this. They think they may have made a mistake. If you have a guy like Vince there, he's going to motivate you from front to end to paint you a picture of what this is going to look like and also let you know that he's on your side. He's here doing this with you and helping you make a decision that you know, I like to think between you and me that that's God, right? Or some definition of a higher power that came in and said, hey, I can't do this anymore. I need to ask for help, and called a complete and total stranger that they had never met before and said, hey, show me what to do. Of course, I mean, our disease tells us to back off at some point in time. A company EAP is not going to motivate you through.
They may not have ever been addicted to a thing in their life, which, thank God, no problem, more power to them. But a person sitting with you or on the other line, you know, of the phone, the other side of the phone, is going to say, look, I've done that more than once or twice a week, and I know how you feel, but give me the truth. I never did this once or twice a week because it was impossible. You had to do it more than that. You know, we always refer back to it's like hugging God. Well, yeah, you're going to want that more than once or twice a week because that's how good it feels. So we know that once or twice a week, but there's certain things they don't teach you in college. And, you know, like one of the things might be, you know, like they can't teach you what it's like to have a severe craving. They can't teach you what it's like to be in severe withdrawal. So they take your word for it. You don't meet criteria, and it's a cycle. You're back to doing what you're doing.
It's funny, yeah. I mean, I know inherently that alcoholics and those addicted to drugs are inherently likely to be dishonest, right? Or to under-embellish or to over-embellish what they need to. That's just kind of a part of the disease. It's a symptom, right? And unfortunately, not everyone can call them out on that symptom. I certainly can. You're right. It's something that they don't teach you in college. It's just kind of second nature, especially being somebody that's been through it. That's why the peer support thing is so huge these days.
Absolutely.
Peer support, I think, does not. And what I mean by peer support is literally, if we're looking at what Vince does, like a fellow union member, literally just there to provide support for what you're going through. And that's it. It's almost like an additional fellowship, right?
Sure.
And it's there so you never really can slip or fall through the cracks. And that's the guy that's going to be like, hey, listen, man, I know you don't smoke crack once or twice a week. Nobody's done that in the history of time. It's just not doable.
In the history of crack.
I actually remember one time I talked to a woman on the phone and she said, yeah, my husband uses heroin, but only on the weekends. I was like, really? Just like once on the weekends? Oh, no, all weekend. And I was like,
okay, yeah, that's different.
That doesn't make any sense to me.
No.
How of Friday to Sunday, I had to tell her, I said, I think your husband might be feeding you a load of crap because do you happen to go to work between Monday and Friday? Oh, you do? Yeah, okay. And we kind of slowly start to break things down and provide the service that's needed.
Sure.
Additional topic I really wanted to get into with Vince, especially being as tenured as he is.
Or Vinny. I mean, nobody calls me Vince.
I know. I don't know why they're calling you Vince today.
That's all right, bro.
It's because we're in this fancy office right now.
The think tank.
It's esteemed.
The esteemed think tank.
The esteemed think tank. I want to talk about mental health and its relevance today in substance use and alcohol use disorder. Because when I got sober, and I didn't even get sober that long ago. I've been sober 8 years. I started seriously trying to get sober like 10 years ago. We weren't coming into care. We weren't coming into treatment with people trying to initially throw pretty large mental health diagnoses at us. I mean, more often than not, when you come in and you go through detox, are they going to give you an antidepressant? probably like a very mild SSRI, something to just kind of get your brain chemistry back to where it needs to be, without a doubt. Are you experiencing anxiety because you're coming off of your body being physically dependent on a substance?
Sure.
For sure, right? We can give you something for your heart rate. But now I see more often than not, especially dealing with loved ones, people are trying to throw what we would call a primary diagnosis, as in the main issue being a mental health diagnosis over just classic alcoholism or addiction, right?
Well, you have to understand that, I know we talked about this before, the two schools of thought with regard to addiction. The first is it's genetic, you're going to pass it down, you just get it from your family members, whatever. The second school of thought, the most recent, is all addiction is caused by something, a mental health issue, a catastrophic issue, a traumatic issue. And I kind of believe in a little bit of both, because I look at everything, or try to look at everything, and it always leads back to, well, if being so depressed or anxious as a child, maybe that's what you're trying to run away from. Maybe that's what you're trying to get relief from. Maybe your parents are getting divorced and it's so nasty that you're trying to get relief from that. Maybe all of a sudden you're feeling very much alone in the world because your family is splitting up, that you turn to something to fill that void, fill that hole. I'm not saying it happened to you or not. What I'm saying is it's a possibility, and it's something that you have to consider. And that's why when I went to treatment in 1986, you were an alcoholic or a drug addict. Now, when you go in, oh yeah, you're still an alcoholic and an addict, but let's drill down on why you're here. It's not just you're an alcoholic or you're an addict. It's what may have caused you to start down that path.
Right. What was the catalyst?
What's the catalyst? Like, what is making you feel the need to do this stuff?
We talked about this on my episode, I believe, a little bit more.
Yeah, we talked about it a couple different times, and it's just something that we consider more in 2024 than we did in 1986.
And I'm not trying to disprove that in any capacity, but what I am saying is, and I'm going to probably pull out my tinfoil hat in a little bit here, so buckle your seatbelt,
Sure.
ladies and gentlemen. What I'm trying to say is that when people seek care and treatment now, I feel as though, from my side of things, what I see is that they're primarily trying to treat the mental health diagnosis, and that the way alcoholism and substance use was treated before is dying off, because they're almost treating it primarily as mental health.
Mm-hmm.
Like nowadays, and I really, truly, in my hardest of hearts, believe that this is being pushed by insurance companies and big pharma. I really do. I think that they have pushed medication-assisted treatment on treatment providers so heavily over the course of the last 3 years, and they're also pushing things like dialectal behavioral therapy. I don't know if you know this or not, and it took me some time to realize this, but the 12 steps, particularly steps 4 through 9, is essentially CBT, right? It's cognitive behavioral therapy. It's gaining knowledge of what my reactions are, and growing to accept them, and then trying to make them right if they're wrong. That's what I've gauged that CBT is, right?
Well,
it's the same thing.
But what came first? The 12 steps came before CBT. It's 89 years old.
No, you're right.
You know what I mean?
The 12 steps came before CBT.
And I don't have a problem with CBT. The thing is, it's therapeutic.
It is.
For you to go through that, because again, you're drilling down on what's the issue. I do have a problem with medication-assisted treatment, not through detox, because you need it, or you need some of it to get you from where you were to where you should be. But the long-term medication-assisted treatment, like Suboxone or Methadone or something like that, that's where, in my opinion, you should have to qualify for something like that.
And you should have to seriously qualify, because there was a time in order to qualify for, let's just say, Suboxone, like buprenorphine treatment, medication-assisted treatment, you needed to have like 10 plus treatment episodes in the last 2 years. But there was this other dynamic that they wanted to look at, that was family support, because they realized that family support was such a large factor in you being able to successfully take medication to treat your addiction over the course of 2 years. You need that support. Imagine having to line up at a clinic every day at 7 a.m., just to get your dose. I mean, you need that family support. Nowadays, and I can tell you this from previously working for a very large scale treatment provider that is in constant contact with a lot of different big insurance companies, nowadays, they'll ask you to get put on MAT after your first treatment episode.
Exactly.
They will cut you short your residential stay and say, hey, we're recommending after 14 days that this guy step down to an intensive outpatient level of care, and we want to see him get put on MAT. And guess what? They're also, nowadays, they're pushing things like Klonopin and Adderall usage.
It's ridiculous.
Paired with MAT. And it's insane. It's changing the entire dynamics of treatment.
And that's why sometimes you have to, like what I do for all my union members, because I represent the machinist union, basically with regard to addiction treatment. Basically, I seek out the best. I mean, I refer into about 20 or so different treatment centers across the country. And you have to find the ones that are still doing the work without prescribing that medication-assisted treatment. And I said earlier about qualifying. In my opinion, some 19-year-old that's been doing Percocets for a year does not qualify for medication-assisted treatment.
No chance. And you know what? Give that kid 30 days as well.
Right. But maybe the guy doing heroin for 30 years, he has to get medication-assisted treatment because his brain is basically worn away the ability to give you those feel-good chemicals.
Well,
and we see that in treatment when someone goes through detox and it just looks like they're deeply depressed. It's because their brain isn't making those feel-good chemicals anymore, like what we all have naturally.
I will say I have, given everything that's happened with fentanyl, right? Like, bless, knock on wood over here. Never had a run-in with fentanyl. Got sober before it was kind of extreme. The physical cravings for fentanyl, they say, can last upwards of 5 months. Like,
that's big.
That's insane, right? So when I used to be so anti-MAT, and I still am to some capacity, but when I look at treating that and then I see a product like Sublocade, I've literally watched this happen professionally through a lens. I knew a kid, right? Just case study here really fast. I knew a kid who I got sober with about 8.5 years ago. Dynamite kid in 12-step fellowship. Stayed sober for a really long time, but like many, and you'll hear this story more often than not nowadays, in COVID, he was cut off from his support network and he ended up picking up. That was in 2021. He has not been able to string together a decent amount of sobriety over the course of the last 3 years.
Really?
No. And he will come into treatment. He will complete treatment. He'll say, I'm going to go back to sober living. I'm going to get plugged back in with the rooms. I'm going to do everything I have to do to get back to where I was. But the grips that fentanyl and what they have nowadays have on him is so tight that he will have a sustainable 90 days of recovery and pick back up again every single time.
That's amazing.
So when Sublocade came into play as an extended release shot, I believe Sublocade lasts for about 90 days. You get a shot, and it lasts 90 days. It's a lifesaver for a guy like that.
For a guy like that, and that's I don't mind that kind of medication-assisted treatment because you're only going to do it for 6 months or 9 months.
It's finite, yeah.
It is finite. If you get on a Suboxone, you are on it forever unless you detox off of it. Same thing with methadone. If you know the old saying, "Oh, you got liquid handcuffs on." That's exactly what it is. Picture being outside of a center, 7 a.m. to get your dose. It's a shame, but you'll be on it literally forever because if you stop taking it, it's the worst withdrawal you could feel.
Coming off of methadone is agonizing. I hear about a lot of guys coming off of methadone in jail, actually. Is more often than not, they end up in jail for whatever reason while using because most people on methadone aren't pursuing recovery like you and I have.
Of course.
That's their module of recovery.
Yeah, that's a shame.
They show up to the clinic every day and how different is your life at that capacity?
How can you actually, you don't see anybody wearing suits in that line to get their little cup of methadone. And it's a shame because you're crippling someone who should try to get out there and get back into society. You giving that little cup of methadone, you're kind of crippling them into not being able to do that.
What scares the life out of me is that I think one day you will see a guy in a suit lining up to get not a cup of methadone, but something like that, right? Like at a Suboxone clinic, you will see a guy who, stereotypical, hurt his knee, got addicted to Percocets, doing X, Y, and Z. Regular guy, he graduated from college, and he'll go to call his therapist or his insurance company, and their first thought will not be for him to go to inpatient treatment. Their first thought will be for him to just get right on Suboxone. And that's why my tinfoil hat's on.
Yeah, I mean, you don't know what's going to happen in the future, and hopefully something like that would never happen. But we've seen where this industry has taken us. I mean, I remember back when I got clean, it was a totally different industry. You went in, you just got 30 days of treatment or more. Now you go in. You may be on medication-assisted treatment, hopefully not, but you may only get the first 5 days approved. And then they do a review of your case, and you get 3 more days approved. Then they do another review. You get 4 more days, and 3 more, and 4 more. And, the whole time you're sitting there in treatment saying, oh, am I getting out on Saturday, or are they going to approve me for another week? Well, so your head's, especially if the treatment center is telling you, well, we only got you, approved through Monday, but when Monday rolls around, we're going to try to get you approved through the whole next week. And it's now your patient in treatment is worried about when he's going to go or if he's getting more time to be there. It's a shame.
I remember around maybe 2011, 2010, we had all those, in the Pennsylvania, Philadelphia area, we had Act 106, right? Act 106 was a straight mandate of a 30-day length stay. This wasn't even that long ago. It was a straight length of stay mandate for you to be in treatment. Some insurance policies had it, some didn't. They had the same thing in Jersey. The SJ3. SJ3, Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield had it that no matter what, if you hadn't been to treatment before, even if you didn't really meet criteria for what an insurance company would think would need detox and 30 days of residential treatment, you were getting 30 days no matter what.
Right.
It was beautiful. It was always kind of incredible to see that because this sick and suffering individual is going to get exactly what they need and not have to worry about things like utilization and review, like you were just talking about, nickel and dime in those days. And you're right, they don't know. It completely changes their experience when they're in care. Because what's the next step? Is there even a next step? I don't know what's happening. I want to get out of here,
Yeah, if you're not going to tell me, I got to go.
It creates this terrible dynamic. And to think that those mandates were put into place 10 years ago, and nowadays the same exact insurance companies are like, hey, we really only want to see most of our covered lives in treatment for 17 days, and then we want them in an intensive outpatient program with medication-assisted treatment or some sort of med management, and guess what? These are the meds we like. Come on, man.
Yep.
Come on, man.
I agree.
I think it's ridiculous, and what I think it creates is there used to be a dynamic in a treatment center where in order to be there, you really had to want to be there.
Oh, yeah.
If you didn't want to be there,
they
were tight on beds, so you could get out. And when you were ready to want to be there, you could come back, But nowadays, I've been telling people this for the last 2 years, there's more beds than there are heads.
Oh, yeah.
So they allow the inmates to run the asylum. I don't mean to use
that
language,
I know
but it creates this very different dynamic where you're not engaging in the program is engaging you.
Right.
So you at this point in time need to you need to almost it's kind of a shame. I really actually regularly think about how I would have gotten sober today, because the way I got sober, I mean, I was completely done, right? I was at the very wit's end. I was willing to take any suggestions. I went into treatment. If I didn't make group every single day when I was in treatment, they would have told me to get the hell out. They would have been like, get out of here nowadays. You know what I mean? Nowadays, if I went into treatment, they were like, hey, you coming to group today?
Right.
I'm like, yeah, I'm thinking about it. And they're like, cool, here's a sausage, egg, and cheese. And I'm like, what? You know?
Yeah, that didn't fly.
And listen, there are great centers out there that still, I will say, I'm blessed to represent one of them. There are great centers out there that still do things the old-fashioned way, you know, because they can operate in a smaller capacity, which is so important. But more often than not, we're seeing this different dynamic. And at the end, I remember the case manager that sat down with me said, hey, guess what, bud? Everyone was going to Florida back then. This was 2013, 14. Everyone was going to Florida, you know, good, bad, or indifferent, how you feel about it. People were going somewhere after treatment, right? I was like, I want to go to Florida. Right. I want to go to Florida. I didn't have the insurance to go to Florida. So they said, nah, you're going to go to this recovery house in Malvern. And guess what? You need $160 when you get there.
Right.
And I said, well, you're not going to buy me a flight to Malvern, right. Pennsylvania, you know? And they were like, no, we're not. And I got there, and that house was strict as all hell. I mean, that if you did not make your bed and do your chore and sign off on your meeting times every week, like, they would politely throw all of your shit out on the lawn and ask you to leave. Like, the guys who were there had to be serious about getting sober, and that got me sober.
Yeah, because you have, like you said, you have to be serious about it. And if you're not serious about it, you're really a detriment to the community, the community in that home.
Absolutely,
because each home has their own community. And if you're a detriment to it, you're not going to be welcome there anymore.
But nowadays, more often than not, these recovery houses, they're offering, guys don't need the 160 to come in anymore. And guess what? We do all our shopping at Trader Joe's. You know what I mean? Like, they're leveraging different things. It's just not like it used to be. It's not like it used to be. And the quality of life that I live today, I don't think is as easily attainable for the guy trying to get sober today, you know? I had to work super hard at this. I'm super stubborn. I'm like I've said, I say when we open every podcast, I'm an alcoholic, right? I will fucking take, lie, cheat, and steal, and manipulate my way into anything to make it fit what I want it to
like
be.
I always say, you'll sell your grandmother's soul to get whatever you need to continue down your path.
And that was the same in early recovery. You know, even my first 6 months sober. So you need to throw me in an environment that's going to challenge all of that right away. And it's going to wean out how serious I am or how serious I'm not, right?
Sure.
And nowadays, I feel like there's just this very delayed reaction to get there. Like, I got there. I had to get there in 90 days. I had to put up or shut up, you know?
Yeah.
I had to ride the wave that they wanted me to ride. It wasn't my own wave. And that was what I needed. And listen, you've heard me say it before. I live an incredible life today.
Sure.
With moral compass and good structure and routine that allows me to stay good even when I'm not good, you know?
Yep. Well, think about what's going on now. There's a lot of people are in this for all the wrong reasons. You know, that structure that you once had 10 years ago at that sober home in Malvern. I mean, now there's places open and all they want are heads in beds. They don't really care about, oh, you missed a meeting. All right. As long as you keep paying. And that's a shame. That's really a shame because people are in it for all the wrong reasons. They're in it for the money only. And they swear they're doing the right thing, but they're not. They're just in it for the money. I mean, you shouldn't be able to buy a Lamborghini being in this business.
I agree.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you know, and if you can, you know, like I said, we could talk for hours about that, but, you know, I don't want to stumble over that, but it seems like, you know, there's like, take the out-of-network institution. They always say, oh, we really care about doing the right thing. We care about our patients in here. Well, if you cared, wouldn't you be in network
Yeah.
so you could take more people? But no, you stay out of network so you could charge more.
Yeah.
Their heads aren't in the right. They're in it for the money, and most of those owners that are in it for the money are in recovery, but they've slipped back into their drug addicted ways, where they would lie, cheat, steal, sell their grandmother's soul for one more head in their bed.
Yeah. It's congested, that's for sure. I mean, I'll agree with you there. My hot topic in the treatment space these days is private equity firms.
Sure. Oh yeah, they want to own them because they can make that kind of money.
I mean, the numbers, the purchases of some of these centers by some of these higher private equity firms would blow your mind, because they're way too high, and a lot of them are on some crazy loan at some crazy high interest rate.
Yep.
And they are going off of figures from the big out of network days.
Sure.
And they have in network rates, and they're not making their marks at all. And what happens is they buy all these centers and they just strip them down to nuts and bolts. And what ultimately happens is it's a terrible place to work. If I know one thing about treatment, is if you make your treatment center a great place to work, if every therapist, every janitor, every behavioral health technician comes into work every day with a passion to help people, inherently people are going to get good treatment.
Sure.
It's all about creating a good culture for people to work in. And that's just not happening at these large conglomerates anymore. Like their bottom line is too high.
Yep.
You know, their corporate costs are immensely insane. You got people making millions of dollars, right?
Yep.
And you have a therapist with a caseload of 15 at some center, and she's losing her mind. You know what I mean? She's not having a good time, and inherently all 15 of those clients on her caseload are not having a good experience in treatment.
Right, and she's there till midnight writing reports up.
Oh yeah, right.
So it's she's making minimum wage at some point. It's a shame, because you can really do the right thing and you can help a lot of people if you have your head screwed on straight and you're not looking for that, that Lamborghini, so to speak.
I agree, brother. I agree. Well, I'll tell you what. To disclose a little bit about what's been going on with me. I have been seeing a therapist for the last maybe like 10 weeks, right? And I was diagnosed ADHD. I say this in my story at a very young age. I was in first grade, so this was 1997.
Mm-hmm.
And they just threw me on Ritalin, right? And
I
remained on some form of amphetamine from the time I was in first grade till the time I dropped out of high school in 12th grade, I learned how to do everything taking some form of ADHD medication, right? And then when I went to treatment in high school, I'll never forget, I'm going to get out of treatment, and they're looking at my sheet, and they're like, "You prescribed Adderall?" I'm like, "Yeah." And they're like, "You take it as prescribed?" And I was like, "Sometimes, yeah." And they're like, "But do you ever do you ever use it this way?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, I crush it up all the time." And they're like, "Yeah, buddy, you can't take this."
Right.
I'm like, "What do you mean I can't take this? I don't even know if I could step into a classroom and function without it."
Right.
It turns out that I couldn't. I wasn't ready to get sober then either. I actually ended up, right after that, I ended up dropping out of high school maybe 3 or 4 weeks later. But I never touched Adderall again. Not just because I didn't have the script and it wasn't really ever like something I desired.
Right.
But I will say, I've recently been seeing a therapist, and then the first thing I introduced myself with is, "Yeah, I have ADHD and I don't take meds for it." And the therapist is now telling me that I may not have ADHD, that I may actually suffer from like a pretty generalized mood disorder. We don't have a name for it. I don't know if I'm bipolar or what he wants to say. I love this guy, this therapist I'm seeing. He's a 12-step guy. He knows the deal backwards and forwards. And he says, "You have a mood disorder, and we're going to call your mood disorder. We're not going to put a name on it. We're not even going to say the words medication, right?
Sure.
We're going to call it racy brain."
Racy brain. I like that.
He said to me the other day, he said, "Let me ask you a question. Do you wake up in thought?" And I said, "What'd you say?" He said, "Yeah, do you wake up in thought?" I said, obviously I wake up with crippling thoughts at 7:30 in the morning, thinking
Right.
about things that I don't even know are going to happen or not. He said, yeah, I don't wake up in thought. I said, you don't? You don't wake up in thought? He said, no, I wake up, I go downstairs, I make myself a cup of coffee, and maybe my first thought is, oh, there's a squirrel looking out the window.
Right.
I was like, excuse me, I said, get the hell out of here.
Right.
There's no way that's true. I literally couldn't believe it. He said, no, people don't. He said, I watch you. People don't function the way you function. So, gearing back towards this topic of mental health and substance use disorder and treatment, I was very, very against medication or even ever considering having a mental health diagnosis. Like, I like to go to sleep and wake up every day thinking that I suffer from alcoholism, I suffer from drug addiction. That is my issue, and I know how to treat that. But maybe there is something else going on with me that the medical journals in 1997 couldn't identify like they can now. And guess what? We don't have to use meds to treat it. All we have to do is acknowledge it, right? That's step one. So what he told me was, I just want you to acknowledge it. He said, I want you to be aware of this racy brain that you have. So this experience for me is somebody who, like, you know, I've continued to say tinfoil hats and kind of gets upset at insurance companies. And I really like to say that not everyone has generalized anxiety or major depressive disorder. I have racy brain.
I like that. Maybe that'll appear in the DSM next time they write it.
I don't know what it is. Again, I've only been seeing him for like 10 weeks, but it is very comforting to know that there is a resource out there that caters to somebody like me that has so many objections up front to dealing with mental health, you know? And maybe I'm just scared. I don't know what it is, but I'm very interested in this sort of path I'm on. I'll definitely update the podcast as we continue to progress through it. And
that'd be cool.
Yeah, it's you know, there's two sides to every story, right? There's
Absolutely.
Two sides to every coin, and I can't sit here and only live on one. So I'm continuing with this treatment right now. I am waking up with crippling thoughts every day, but when I wake up I go, brother, these are those things you were talking to the therapist about.
Yeah, at least you're aware of it.
Maybe
you're more cognizant of it.
And you know what I do is I pray. I mean, I pray every morning. I pray every morning, and I read page 86 to 88 in my Chosen 12-Step Fellowships book. And that kind of gets me to where I need to be. But I'm definitely looking at continuing to recover in, I won't say diverse or different ways than I historically have, but I'm much more open-minded than I have been for the last 8 years. That's for certain. You know, I used to think God was the only medicine that I ever needed.
Well, He put other things in front of you to use.
Sure, for sure.
So that's where, that's where you have to expand a little bit. Like, God sends you things to utilize so you can be clean and sober, so you can feel better. It's about praying for the right answer, but He puts the answer in front of you. So you got to utilize it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, looking back on that mental health issue, that ADHD that you were diagnosed with back in the 90s, maybe that was whatever it is you were feeling, racy brain, whatever you want to call it, 27 years ago, whatever it is, could have been a reason for you to start down your path of addiction. You just never know. I believe alcoholism doesn't just appear one day. Drug addiction doesn't just appear one day. I believe it's caused by something. Maybe it's caused by a gene. I don't know. But maybe it's caused by some mental health issue that you were feeling that nobody could put their finger on. And this guy just says it's racy brain, which is a good term for it. But maybe you were doing things to slow that racy brain down a little bit to make yourself feel better.
I definitely think it's an age thing too. I'm approaching my mid-30s.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't, I don't know what's gonna happen. I don't know why this is coming up now. You know, I got a couple kids, as I've said before. I try not to ask why. I just am trying to sort of acknowledge and move forward. I may very well have ADHD. That's the other thing. That's what my therapist said. He said, you may have ADHD, but you may not.
That's right.
He said a lot of you millennials were misdiagnosed with ADHD.
Sure.
In the middle of, you know, in the 90s, they were pushing that stuff hard.
Oh,
right? Yeah. So, I don't know, man. I'm just blessed that I've had resources in my life that continue to kind of show up for me and knock down any sort of stubborn initial intuition that I had.
Yeah, sure.
And just let me know that as long as I stay sober, like, things are going to work out, you know? May require a bit of trial and error.
Sure.
But we'll see.
You know, in the end, you know, as long as you maintain your sobriety, you keep going to your 12-step meetings, you keep in touch with your sponsor, things like that, you can try other things. You can try new therapeutic things to help you feel a little bit better, you know, short of abusing a drug or some form of alcohol.
Yeah, I'm just really interested to see what the next 10 years of treatment looks like, because as a provider, we are all moving into the mental health space, and we are treating primary mental health with zero substance use disorder or addiction. And there's been such a ramp up of it in the post-COVID world there, where people do really need help. I mean, also, I mean, a whole nother topic for another time, but the induced medical marijuana, the medical marijuana induced psychosis is insane.
It's skyrocketing.
Yeah.
A lot of people think like, well, you know, it's just weed. It's just weed. Well, there's a difference. If you look at the weed in 1990 and you compare it to the weed that was grown and smoked in 2000, the weed from 2000 is, on average, was 9 times stronger than the weed in 1990. And that's just insane. And the weed in 2000 is nothing compared to the stuff that they have today from these marijuana shops.
You wouldn't believe some of the calls that I've gotten. It's usually from a concerned mother, and more often than not, I kid you not, it's about their 19-year-old son. And they're 19, she says, my son has changed, right? And they describe what I would consider a schizoaffective disorder.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're describing a young man that is not sleeping at all, is either in like a very heavy manic episode or is schizoaffective. And all they can find are these weed cartridges, right? These little vapor cartridges that these kids are just living on, and it's literally sending them into another realm. It's funny, I don't think, I mean, I'm sure that the insurance companies are starting to catch up with it, but the thing is that they want their loved ones to go to treatment. They want them to go to rehab,
sure,
substance use treatment. And I'm like, listen, I hate to tell you this, but this isn't substance use disorder. Like, this is mental health at its highest. And a lot of them have a really hard time coming out of it.
Yeah. It ain't like the weed your daddy smoked.
Definitely.
That's for
Not
sure.
even like the weed I smoked. I mean,
exactly. I have an uncle that was that's a Vietnam veteran, and we were talking one day, and he was talking about the weed that they used to smoke over in Vietnam. He said, "My God, it was so good." I'm like, you know, it was really trash compared to what's out today. He says, "No, not if you knew where to get it." And I thought to myself, I'm not going to argue with my Vietnam War veteran uncle. So I just like, yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
you're right.
Yeah,
you're probably right. And I'm thinking that was such dirt they were smoking. It's not even
stick.
funny.
That's what they used to call it, Thai stick, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, my dad used to tell me about the Thai stick.
Yeah, that's right. Thai stick, Hawaiian. There was a lot of different names for it, but it was just garbage compared to the hydroponically grown stuff that they're getting today, or that, you know, how they're growing it. They're growing it in this enriched soil, or when they do it hydroponically, they're growing it with this enriched water that they use, and it's just, the weed is coming out on the other side like it's just incredibly strong. And it's a big time detriment, especially for the younger society, You know, because they don't know any better. They don't know what weak stuff was and what strong. They only know what this strong stuff is, and it hurts them.
It's just like a completely different world now. I mean, they prescribe it now. You know, it's not like it used to be, and it's also so. The vape thing is crazy. The vape thing is crazy because you have to think. You used to have to go roll a joint, step outside. I remember in January smoking a joint in January in the cold. You would step outside. You would smoke weed that is, like you said, light years less strong than what we have today.
Absolutely.
And you would go inside, and that was it. Now you're sitting on your couch, steadily dosing yourself throughout the 16 hours that you're awake.
Right.
No wonder people are having mental breakdowns, you know?
Yep. And there, you know, and that affects society in general. You have the younger generation that doesn't even, there's some that don't even want to go out and get jobs. I mean, it's a shame. You know, as long as they can live with their parents and they have enough money for weed or whatever it is they're doing, there's no incentive even to leave your basement, which is a shame.
And that's no comment on that. That's a topic for another time.
Yeah.
That's my generation getting overly coddled by your generation.
Yeah.
To be honest with you. Just to call a spade here, I will say.
You're probably right.
Till the end of my days, the greatest thing my mother ever did to me is looked at me, an opiate addicted, absolutely not ready to get clean and sober, just drug addict. When I was 17, she said, "Yeah, you can't live here anymore."
Right. Exactly.
And I'll tell you what, my life is inherently, I am a good father and a good husband and a good man because she did that for me, you know? And I can't imagine how hard it was, you know?
I can't imagine having to live through that on one end or having to do that as a parent on the other end. You know, that takes a lot for your mother to sit there and say, you have to leave. Not knowing where you're going or what you're doing when you walk out that door. It takes a lot.
Yeah.
But you came out of it on the other side good.
Stronger and having a great deal of more respect for myself, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, well, this was fun, brother.
Yeah, I had a good time. We we picked a nice couple of topics, and we'll do this again. Definitely. We would love to hear some feedback on topics that the audience would like to hear us do.
Definitely.
We'll be back next week with guests, and I had a good time doing this.
Me too, brother. I had a fantastic time. I love being able to kind of disclose our story to our listeners as well. I think more of it will come out as time goes on, just because I know we have a couple different tales in what we do.
Sure.
That can't go unsaid. But I gotta say, I appreciate you. I appreciate our listeners. I'm Sam. I'm an alcoholic and an addict.
I'm Vinny. I'm an alcoholic and an addict, and you are listening. You have just listened to Tenacious Recovery. You got to be tenacious about your recovery if you want to stay sober. And for Sam, I'm Vinny, and God willing, we'll see you next time.
Thanks.